Welcome to ACF Chefs Forum. We appreciate all of you tuning in today for this webinar presented in partnership with Retail Bakers of America. Today, our presenters will discuss the benefits of different forms of culinary cannabis, as well as demonstrate the basic techniques and science of baking with cannabis. ACF is excited to have an expert here with information just for you, the leaders of the food service industry. Before we begin, as a note, we will be answering as many questions as possible after the presentation. Please use the chat function to collaborate with other viewers and use the Q&A function anytime during the session to post questions for today's speakers. Let's get the discussion started going in the chat by telling us where you're tuning in from today. We'd love to hear where you are. I'm Chris Tanner, American Culinary Federation's Executive Director. Our trend for today, higher cuisine. With cannabis becoming recreationally legal in much of the United States, it's also finding its way to the dinner table. We've seen the explosive growth of THC-laced edibles with gummies, chocolates, and baked goods over the past couple of years now. Chefs and beverage makers are experimenting with infusions and compound dishes and drinks. According to Data Central, millennials are driving interest in consumption in products containing both cannabis, non-high-inducing CBD, which is said to relieve anxiety and can be found in everything from cocktails to donuts. Last year, ACF launched a specialized certificate in culinary cannabis and edibles available through our online learning center. Let's meet our first guest. Chef Marissa is Retail Bakers of America's Education and Certification Director. She graduated from the Culinary Institute of America in Baking and Pastry Arts and earned a master's degree in food studies at New York University. She began her career working with James Beard Award-winning chef Joanne Chang at Flower Bakery in Boston, and later served as pastry chef at the Castle on the Hudson in Tarrytown, as well as the Roundhouse at Beacon Falls in Beacon, New York. Most recently, she worked as both a food writer and adjunct professor at the Culinary Institute of America. At this time, I'll pass the presentation over to Chef Marissa. Marissa, please take it away.
Thank you so much for the wonderful introduction. The RBA is so happy to be here partnering with the ACF Chefs Forum. For those of you who are not familiar, the RBA is the National Trade Association for Retail Bakeries. We are here with Chef Hope Frahm, the corporate chef of Love's Oven. Love's Oven started in 2009 and is a pioneer in the regulated cannabis industry. They've received numerous awards, and Love's Oven has grown to be one of the most recognized cannabis brands in Colorado and beyond. With the 2014 legalization of adult use recreational cannabis in Colorado, Love's Oven's sales skyrocketed to over $1 million that very first year. Since 2014, Love's has ventured out of the oven to include chocolates, beverages, and concentrates, in addition to canna butter infused cookies and brownies. We're really excited to have you here, Chef Hope. Chef Hope came to her position at Love's Oven in 2013. She attended the Art Institute of Las Vegas Culinary School for their baking and pastry program. During culinary school, she began working for Thomas Keller's Bouchon Bistro as chef de partie. She also worked for the Wolfgang Puck Restaurant Group before moving to Denver. At Love's Oven, Chef Hope is responsible for developing marijuana-infused products, out-of-state expansion, product development, and training. We are so excited to have you here, Chef Hope.
Hi, thanks. That was a great introduction. Yeah, let's get started with the basics of cannabis. And apologize to everybody. I'm still very new at this, so let me do this. Share. All right, baking basics. The basics of baking with cannabis. I'm sure I will get over these nerves. All right. All right. What is cannabis and cannabinoids? According to the National Institute of Health and Marijuana, refers to the dried leaves, flowers, stems, and seeds from the Cannabis sativa or Cannabis indica plant. There's at least 113 different types of cannabinoids that have been identified, all derived from CBG. Each cannabinoid serves as a different function, most notably, obviously, THC. I want to point this out really quick. Cannabis, the sativa and indica are the different genotypes of the cannabis plant. Once we started diluting that, you do have the hybrid of both indica and sativa, and some might argue nowadays that there is no real distinction between sativa and indica. But as I go along, I'll define a little bit more that has to do with like the terpenes and the different cannabinoids that are associated with those different effects. All right, let's see. Delta 9 tetrahydrocannabinol, the psychoactive component of marijuana, but the plant itself contains little THC. It's not until the acid is removed from the cannabinoid, THC-A, through the process of decarboxylation. So if you think about just lighting up a joint, you're actually decarboxylating that to get the psychoactive component. You also have CBD. It's the most popular non-psychoactive product. It still needs to be decarboxylated because it does come in the form of CBDA. And cannabinol is CBN. That one's my favorite because it helps you sleep. It's derived from the degradation of THC. So THCA is still pretty good for you. It does have, I'm not a doctor, so don't take any of this as medical advice. It does have anti-nausea and anti-inflammatory, so you can cook with it without decarboxylating, depending on your decarbox or your cooking temperature. Decarboxylation typically occurs between 220 and 240 degrees. So what I like to do when I'm cooking my canna butter is decarboxylate that first and then add it to any of my oils. You know, THC is fat soluble. So putting in any oil, butter, olive oil, I love doing it in bacon fat. It will soak up all that THC. Other extraction methods, solventless extractions, is like I said, canna butter. You can have bubble hash, rosin. You have the solvent extractions, the hydrocarbons, tinctures that use ethanol. Have you ever heard of Briggs Simpson oil? Both methods have their pros and cons. Commonly used solventless extractions, canna butter and rosin. I would say bubble hash is kind of an old school method of producing the higher extracts. Rosins tend to be a lower potency, but keep all your terpenes. Solvent extracts, distillate. You have the hydrocarbon extractions, which basically you put it through you flush it with butane and propane, and then it sucks up all the cannabinoids and the terpenes, and then you have to flush all that out, and then you go through a refining process. You can do winterization, which takes all the lipids out, and then into distillation. You can even go even further and refine it even more into isolate. All right. So terpenes, to keep or not to keep. Terpenes, I believe, provide an important role in your marijuana consumption. I like to keep all of them, as many as I can, in my canna butter. These actually will help you provide the effects. So like I was saying earlier about the different genotypes, you are helping metabolize all of these, you know, the THC, the CBD, the CBN, the CBG into your system. So it can have all these different effects of, you know, anti-inflammatory, antifungal, pain relief, circulation, all of these effects. Why we hate them? We can hate like a lot of people do not like the hashy taste. So they try to take that out as much as possible. People will you obviously use distillate as well as the isolate. And I'll cover some of that with my pros and cons of rosin as well. With the canna butter, because it's an all-natural process and we're processing that with the trichomes, it does have a hashy flavor. So I like to pair the different products with that flavor to help mitigate any negative taste. So, dosing. So I believe this is one of the most important things on the agenda. Like, you have to get used to algebra. You always have to test your concentrate to ensure proper dosing. So whether you're using canna butter and whether you're using distillate, you have to test that in order to make sure that you are fully decarboxylated and dosing to consistent end product. It's simple conversions in mathematics, so make sure to convert everything into metric because that's the best system. And to calculate the decarboxylation, you can get a rough calculation on your own. It's about 13.3% out of the THCA, and then add that to the THC. That's going to give you your max if you're not fully decarboxylated. If you're not, just go back and decarboxylate even further. Calculating the amount of milligrams needed for each batch by multiple piece and package by the batch size and divide by the concentrate. So you have 100 milligrams per package. You need 100 packages. You have 10,000 milligrams. You divide that by your potency of your concentrate, 900. You need 11.1 grams of concentrate into your carrier. And what I mean by carrier, so with our canna butter, it doesn't really need too much of a carrier oil because it is. But if you are making, let's say, chocolates or even baked goods and you're using a distillate, rosin, bubble hash, you're going to need a carrier to homogenize fully into your product. So for instance, my chocolates, when I am dosing into that, I can just add the distillate into the chocolate because it has that high fat ratio, and I can just mix that in. However, with, let's say, my beverages, I have to blend that concentrate with a carrier that has emulsions and sulfates or surfactants in them. That way it's able to bond to the liquid structure of the end product. As well as if I'm mixing, my creme brulee bars, I'm going to have to mix a concentrate into a fat and blend that with the rest of the product to make sure it's fully homogenized. Any questions on that?
No questions coming through yet, Chef.
All right. So like I was saying, homogeneity is the most important in the fusion process. Canna butter is going to be lower in potency. It's primarily used in the baked goods, can be used in savory items. I made a lot of cheddar crackers. However, the savory items, at least right now in Colorado, aren't selling very well. Everybody says they want them, but because of our testings and our regulations, it's very difficult and not cost effective to make those products. Expanding on that, on the markets, you'll notice, like, depending on where you are, what's going to be more popular now versus in the future. When I first started at Love's Oven, we we were only baked goods, and everybody wanted weed all the time and didn't care what it was. And that was great. That was really great for business. As the market sophisticates and people start experimenting with other things, like other types of distillate and rosin, all that, you have to shift your priorities on that. So what we did with the canna butter, it was a very basic process of, okay, you add the marijuana to the butter, you let it decarboxylate, you extract it, and you have canna butter. This produces kind of a rudimentary canna butter. So as people were wanting less weed taste, you have to develop that. We then went into a super butter where you take the canna butter you make and you infuse it with more canna butter. This increases the potency by double. Like I said, THC is fat soluble and there's no saturation point. You can put as much into the fat molecules as you want. So after that, that was not quite enough. So we were getting maybe 2.5% potency. We went up to 4 to 5% potency. Now, with our process, by decarboxylating the trichomes of the plant material, the keef, we separate that in-house. We're able to take that keef and decarboxylate it and then infuse it with the butter. That produces a 10% potency of our canna butter and reduces the amount of canna butter we have to put in the product. So, and it's also a much cleaner product because we're not using any of the plant material that has all the chlorophyll in there. On that note, we do take that remaining plant matter and then we will process it into distillate. So we're using every part of the plant, which is really nice. It's good for the environment not to be wasting anything. And also we get that extra bonus when we need distillate for our chocolates or our beverages, we're able to have that product on hand. Moving on to homogeneity. So here in Colorado with homogeneity, and having several kitchens or several different states, kitchens in different states, not all the rules are the same. Colorado is very strict on how we are testing. Homogeneity, how they test for that, that's going to be, they test 4 products. You have to send in 4 packages of products and they will test 4 random pieces from that and they have to test within 10% of each other of the label claim as well. So label claim is going to be what's on your label. So you have to test within 15% of that and 10% within the 10 or the 4 pieces that they test. So very hard with multi-layer products. So if you're thinking about doing a multi-layer product, please be aware that your inclusions, your toppings, anything like that, if you need to test for homogeneity, that's going to be affected. Or that's going to affect your outcome, depending on how well you sprinkle pecans on a turtle brownie or spread your caramel. You just got to make sure that you are doing it very consistently.
Jeff, are there also different rules in different states on level of potency you're able to produce?
So that depends on the individual state, but yes, so Florida, I know because they're medical only, they can do 200 milligrams at a time or in a package, but they all have to be 10 milligram serving sizes. So and in Vermont, they have 100 milligrams, but they have to do 5 milligram sizes. So you have 20 pieces. So it varies from state to state. Here in Colorado, it's the standard 10-10, so up to 100 milligrams. For homogeneity with baked goods, you got to remember to scrape those bowls because you're leaving money in the bowl. And thinking about that as far as, waste and all of, your utensils and everything that has on there or that's left in the mold, you're working with a product that, like my butter cost, I would say $1 a gram. So if you think about if you're putting 100 grams into, a package, then or into a batter, you want to make sure you get all that out. Plus, you don't want to mess up your testing. Distillate is good to use in all edibles because it doesn't have the hashy taste. It can be a little bit harder to dose in smaller batches because you have a less margin for error. But in the larger batches, you don't really. The best way that I have found to portion out distillate is to portion it into a silicone cup or mold and then freeze it and then pop it out into your product to actually homogenize it into whatever you're using, your carrier or your chocolate. This reduces the amount of waste and ensures your dosing is going to be more accurate. And then also with the terpene profiles of what you're producing, if you're using a rosin or a can of butter, play around with those flavors. I mean, I had at one point a Pineapple Express can of butter. It was so good. I couldn't let it just go to anything. So I had to create a specific product for that. And I paired it with a mango ginger cookie. So a Pineapple Express mango ginger cookie. So experiment with your terpene profiles. Here in Colorado, we cannot taste anything. So it's kind of hard, going through the R&D process. I actually have to wait until testing passes and I have to manifest my products out to a dispensary and actually have to go pick it up. So it's like a 2-week turnaround time for me to actually taste my own product. Might be different in every state. And all the states, it's just a different laws and, work with your regulators on that. So, trending, the new stuff. So I was talking about rosin. So rosin is a solventless concentrate that uses heat and pressure. There's live rosin and there's cured rosin. So live rosin, you're going to be producing it from an actual live plant, basically a plant that's just been cut down, and you are processing it with heat and pressure. And that seeps out all the terpenes, all the THC, and into this tiny little pile of sap. Cured rosin is just like it says, it's made from the cured plant. So they do it in the exact same process. You're not gathering as much of those terpenes because if you think about if you pull, a rose is going to smell much sweeter, right, when you pick it versus, after being dried out. Unless you're making some nice potpourri. Edible grade rosin. And I want to say this is like a controversial thing for me as a chef because I want to say that personally I think rosin is a very trendy thing for edibles, and I think it's also a way for people to make more money because you can charge more. Rosin yields very little and it has a lower potency. For your dabbing and your vaping and your inhaled products, I think rosin is great. You know, it's solventless. You get the higher potency than you would from flour. But, and you're obviously not taking any of the solvents, the ethanol, the butane, any of that. So I do think it's really good. The edibles grade rosin. So everything that the rosin represents is kind of thrown out the door when you go to edibles grade rosin, because you're already decarboxylating it, which strips away a significant amount of the terpenes. So you're not getting the benefits other than you're going to be able to use it in products like gummies and chocolates because of the higher potency. Granted, it's not as high as distillate or isolate, but you are going to be solventless. That's why I think maybe we should just bring back bubble hash, because that you can get up to 90% potency versus rosin when you're at a, 55, 60% potency, and you're spending a lot less money on bubble hash. That's my controversial opinion. So take it as you will. Not advocating, I'm just looking at the bottom line, the cost analysis of making rosin edibles. Yeah, you can charge an extra buck, but it's going a lot of work. So isolate. I recently started.
Did I have a question, Chef, about the rosin?
Yeah.
When you say it's created with heat and pressure, the question is, what do you mean? What temperatures are you talking with heat and pressure?
Yeah, so a lot of people, you can do this at home, actually. I actually made rosin at home with, granted, it was a brand new straightening iron. Yeah, a straightening iron. So the temperature that can vary. I believe it's going to be about 165 degrees. You want to make it high enough to make sure you get that pressure, that heat. You want to have enough pressure to extract the THC from, but not enough heat to decarboxylate it, because you're going to strip away those terpenes. Isolate. So I've recently started using isolate, not necessarily for THC, but I have started using isolate with CBN and CBD. I love this. Okay, you get it's a more refined version of distillate. It comes in a powdered form, so it's easily dosable. Usually they're coming out at about 98 to 99% potency. So some of the purest concentrate that you can get on the market. It is flavorless because it's all been stripped away. I do not use it for THC because I don't know if the market wants that, quite not necessarily that the market wants it, but it is just not available at this time for the cost. We are spending anywhere from $1.75 to $3 per gram for THC in Colorado. I can get CBD isolate that is, I believe, made in Oregon from FloraWorks. That is 35 cents a gram. So it's a significant change, significant difference. Here in Colorado, you can get THC isolate for anywhere from $5 to $7 a gram. Basically, my whole culinary life here at Love's Oven is cost analysis. Given the way the market is on everything, we in Colorado, everywhere has been, raising prices on groceries and everything. We have state study. We have not raised our prices for our edibles because our customers, they don't want to pay it. And marijuana is a luxury product. So, or it's a luxury commodity. Like, you don't really need it, but you kind of want it. Some people need it. Sorry, some people do need it. Going into nano emulsions. So nano emulsions refer to you take your concentrate. So you're basically taking you're encapsulating your concentrate, which is an oil base, into mixed with surfactants. I'm hoping I'm getting this right. I have machines that do this. Mixing it with surfactants and emulsifying it into very small forms of the concentrate. The two products that I have used personally, Source Emulsion, and we use that for our major beverages, and the Azuka. So Azuka is a bit smaller scale versus the Source. These make it very water soluble. So you can use it in those beverages. You can use it in the gummies, hard candies, things of that nature, things that don't need that fat. The high on both of these, I will say this, these make it very fast acting products. So typically when you're eating an edible, you take about 35 to 45 minutes for that edible to metabolize in your system. That's metabolizing through your liver. So if you think about it, you eat it, it has to go all the way through. With these nano emulsions, it starts breaking down in your system very rapidly because it doesn't have to go through all of that. And you're feeling a high almost immediately within 10 minutes. The Source emulsion, again, we use that in our beverages, very high in potency, and go into the beverages and mix very wonderfully. The Azuka, or the Source, let me go back to the Source. They come in, they have this big piece of equipment, they give it to you in big jugs, and you dose it directly into your product. There's no homogeneity issues with that. It is a little bit more expensive to add to your product cost. The Azuka is a little bit more expensive than what you would use on, or than what you would cost out your end product to. However, you could do it on a smaller scale. And that's why I enjoy this one. You can do it on a smaller scale. It's less equipment. You do get that encapsulation, and you can put it into not only the water soluble products, but also your fat soluble products. And they also have a chocolate that you can add that encapsulates the concentrate, and you can blend it into other chocolates. Any questions on that? I'm sorry, that was a lot.
We do have several questions. We had some questions about how you get the testing instruments for potency or the levels of THC.
Yeah, so testing here in Colorado, and I believe in almost every state, they have third-party testing sites. So if you're a business, you just have to send it in and they report it back to you. I think that one might be, yep, my next slide too. And I'll just expand on this question really quick. Potency, that's going to be, obviously how much is in your product. Homogeneity I covered. The other testing that we have to do, microbials. anything that is yeast or mold related. Residual solvents, that's if you're using anything that used a solvent to produce your concentrate. Obviously, for the rosin and the bubble hash and any solventless product, you don't usually do that. We do test for water activity. Here in Colorado, we don't have to test for pH, but we do as well, just in case. Heavy metals that might be present in the concentrate or in the flour, and that may have been present during cultivation. So they might be able to get through the end of the product. And again, terpene profiles, if you want to play around with those. It's not required here in Colorado. I do believe in Florida, they do require terpene profiles as well. All right. Any questions on those? Or should I field a question?
We have some questions about how it works going from state to state again. If you are in a state that can produce the product, can you still ship it to customers in states where the products cannot be produced is the question.
No. So here we started in Colorado and we partnered with a company down in Florida, Trulieve. So we actually sold our intellectual property so that they could produce the products down there. It is still illegal to ship products from state to state because you would have to go through, FedEx, UPS, and the mail, and those are all federal.
Then we also had a question in terms of regulation and the recall process. Is it different from state to state since it's not federally regulated?
Yes. It's actually here in Colorado, it is not necessarily required. It is for the marijuana, not necessarily any other ingredients. So we have our own system here in called Metric, and it's in several other states as well, that if a plant is flagged or an edible is flagged as potentially dangerous because they failed a test, we will have to recall that item. I think we have our system in place that, we're tracking all of our lot codes for all of our flour, sugar, butter, not just the marijuana, in the event that we have a recall from those ingredients. We were actually one of the only voluntary recall because we had an allergen contamination in our facility of barely, I think, 50 products, but we thought it was the right thing to do to recall. And we were able to do that within 4 hours.
We actually have an allergen related question. Have any terpenes been found to be an allergen of any sort?
Oh, that's a great question. Honestly, I do not know, but I can do some research.
I do have other questions, or we could save them.
Sure.
I'll let you continue with your presentation a little bit, and then we can field some more at the end.
Absolutely. Oh, we're close to the end. So key takeaways: find your preferred extraction method. Continually improve your process. Like I said, with the can of butter, we started off and, we were not going to just be, hey, let's do this and only do this. You have to evolve with the times. I know some of us, or some of our competitors back in the day during the gray market, did not want to conform to the regulations. And we are the last baked good standing here in Colorado. So that's exciting. So just continually improve yourself and continually improve the process and listen to the customers. And really have fun. I mean, you're cooking with weed. So just really make sure you have fun. Don't consume it while you're cooking, because that's not a good idea. It's a really bad idea. So Thanks for listening to my ramblings. So we'll take some questions.
So we do have some questions about determining if you are at home doing a small batch, how are you able to determine how much flour you need to infuse into the mix?
Gotcha. So let's see. If you are trying to put flour, like just straight cannabis flour into like a brownie mix, the best thing to do is going to simmer it into a butter first or an oil and extract it from there. You can do this in a crock pot. I've done this so many times, is put it in the oven, put the cannabis flour in the oven on like a piece of parchment to decarboxylate it. That's going to activate your marijuana. You can do this at 240 degrees for about 40 minutes. It will stink up your apartment or your house, so just be aware of that. It will smoke, so have a really good filter if you have a stingy landlord. Then after that's decarboxylated, throw it into a crock pot with some oil for about 2 hours, and then you can extract it with some cheesecloth. I will say this method, if you're using, let's say, an ounce of flour, use probably a 4-to-1 method or a 4-to-1 ratio. That's going to be 4 parts of your oil to 1 part of your cannabis. To determine the potency of that, you're going to take the potency of the flour and you're going to stretch that out into, so you're going to take the potency of the flour, multiply that by the weight, and add it into the potency of the oil. So that's how you get approximately that number without going through a testing. You're not going to get it super accurate, but you can buy small testing kits online. But that's a good rule of thumb. I usually got about 2.5% potency on an at-home.
Great, thank you. Do you have any thoughts on using sous vide for extract?
You know what? I have thought about that. It does make sense. I am doing these on, when I'm processing in my kitchen, I am processing approximately 20 pounds of plant material at a time. So it doesn't really make sense for me. But on a smaller scale, I think that would be great, as well as using a pressure cooker or a pressure fryer. I have not tried that yet. I'm a little bit scared of the pressure cooker.
Now we also have the question, do you need to use lecithin with the oil or butter?
I do use it sometimes. So with the can of butter, if I am putting distillate straight into butter, I do not need to use a lecithin. I have used it before in, say, my caramel, just to bind my fats into my caramel for my caramel peanut bites, but it is not necessary since that THC, that oil, it's going into oil, so you don't really need that.
And can you define distillate one more time? We have a couple questions about what exactly you're referring to when you say distillate.
Distillate. So distillate is made through a hydrocarbon extraction process, and that's a closed loop system where you take the marijuana, you shove it into a tube, you flush it with either butane or propane, and those are the hydrocarbons that the THC and all the lipids from the plant cling on to. So, and they get flushed into a bowl, and it looks like we call it crude oil. It literally looks like crude oil. It's very thick and very sticky, and from there we refine it. So that crude oil goes through an ethanol bath, which helps separate the lipids and takes out that a little bit of that color from all that chloroform that's on the plant. That and goes into winterization process. The winterization process further refines the that crude oil into a more pretty, nice, and more potent product. From there, then it goes into a distillation process, and it fractions off even further lipids and leaves behind a very nice, refined, and very clear distillate.
Thank you. A lot of questions about applications. One of the questions is, how about infusing honey, making an oxymel, it says. Infusing honey, and it says also, the question is honey / fermented foods.
Oh, that would be awesome. I love fermented foods. I haven't tried infusing honey. I know it has been done. I believe that maybe we'd need to have either that nano emulsion to help bind it because it is an oil, or using isolate. I think whipped honey would be amazing, especially if you're using like a rosin, because you are getting that more fatty, and especially if you're using some of the beeswax in there. And fermented foods. Fermented foods really don't have that much oil in them. So again, if you're wanting to do that, maybe look into the isolate or nano emulsions to help with that fermented food. And I make a mean sauerkraut. Love it.
Do you find, in terms of actual baking, do you find varying baking times or effects on dough elasticity, the way that the baking actually behaves with the cannabis infused fat?
Absolutely. So that again that's a great question, and something I always forget about because I've been in this business for so long. Depending on the potency of your concentrate. So like I was saying earlier, like I went from a 2.5% to a 10% potency. So I was putting, 4 times as much can butter in my cookies than I do now. So what that means is you're compensating for, when you're doing it at 2.5, you have less butter because you have to compensate. You can't just put all that butter in there because your dough's not going to accept it. You have to compensate for that butter, and you're reducing the amount of milk fat in there. You're going to get a more oily cookie. It's not going to cream as well. You're going to have a green cookie. So yes, it does affect it significantly. Not so much if I'm making like a ganache with can butter, because it's pretty much across the board, it pretty much the same, but you are going to have that hashy taste if you have a lower potency. Distillate, not so much. I don't find any issues with that.
The question also asks about, I'm just curious myself, have you played with any bread-like products? Because the question refers to dough elasticity. So I'd just be curious if that works at all.
I have personally made some very good puff pastry with can butter, as well as croissants. And the other product that I make, it's not a bread product. And I did the laminated products because I didn't really want to mess with the dough elasticity, because I just put it in the lamination. The other product that's really good to make with can butter or cannabis is baklava. So highly recommend baklava, especially with canna butter.
Yeah. And we have a lot of drink questions.
Sure.
Would you again explain how you incorporate in a beverage when you're developing a drink, and then also ratios of what you're including in your beverage as well?
So the ratios, okay, so with the beverages, we have outsourced most of that with Azuka and Source. Just because it's a ready-made mix. I have experimented with different surfactants and emulsifiers. That's the way to get it to bind to your water or your base. You can use different things like acacia extract. You can use, let's say, Q Natural. And then you're also going to have a carrier oil. I don't have those ratios right in front of me. That one, I'm not super, that one's not my level of expertise, but I do have those ratios if anybody wants to reach out to me, and I'll leave my email address at the very end. But
Will you be able to share your PowerPoints as well?
sure, absolutely.
So we'll be sending those out to the group. We have gummy questions now. How long do you need to let gummies set before popping them out of the molds? And can you make them with oil?
Ooh, can you make them with oil? I would say, and again, along with side of the drinks, it's not my level of expertise. I mean, you are putting an oil in there because you're dosing it with a distillate, but you are going to need an emulsifier with that. I guess it would just depend on what your oil is and if that's what you're trying to infuse or do your carrier with, and how, if that is your carrier to your distillate, I would say it might be very difficult to get a full emulsification on your product. As far as letting or popping them out of the mold, if you're at room temperature and you have a decent temperature, like less than 70 degrees, you can wait probably, the longer you wait, the firmer it's going to be. So maybe 12 to 24 hours. And then after that, you might need to coat them with a sugar or like a maltodextrin.
Can you elaborate on using tincture to make canna sugar for drinks?
Canna sugar. Okay, so elaborate on tincture. So tincture is an alcohol base, and what I've done in the past is you blend in your tincture into your sugar, and it's going to be kind of clumpy, and then dehydrating it. So I put mine in the oven and I let it dehydrate. Of course, I have a fancy oven. I dehydrate it for, at least 40 minutes. And then I put it back through a RoboCoupe.
Thank you so much. This has been so much incredible information. Do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share before I hand it back over to Chef Chris?
I am so happy to be here, and it was such fun, and I'm sorry if I rambled a little bit too much. It's been a while since I spoke.
No, not at all. It was all fantastic information. So much good information.
Well, thank you. Yeah, just have fun, reach out if you need anything. I'm an open door, open book. I'm here to help as long as don't ask me my ratios for peanut butter.
Well, thank you so much, Chef Hope. It's been wonderful to have you here, and I will turn it over to Chef Chris.
Thanks.
Thank you, chefs. A huge virtual round of applause for as we thank Chef Hope, Chef Marissa, and of course the RBA for a very informative presentation. We appreciate you taking the time to share your important insights on baking with cannabis with our ACF community of culinary professionals. It was really some great info, and you didn't ramble on. You did a great job, Chef. Please be on the lookout for the survey you'll receive in the next day or so, which you'll need to complete to earn your CEH units. We hope you'll join us in the next webinar on April 10th. Chef Nathan will be presenting on properly pressing cannabis rosin for culinary cannabis infusion. Then on April 24th, we'll be hosting a webinar on preventing wasted food with the Natural Resources Defense Council in honor of Stop Food Waste Day. We also look forward to seeing all of you at the ACF National Convention in Phoenix, July 14th through 17th. It's going to be the can't miss culinary education event for the year for sure. To learn more about the upcoming webinars and the ACF National Convention, please visit acfchefs.org and click on the events tab. On behalf of the ACF National Office, thank you again to our presenters for their bringing us this opportunity, and thank you all of you for joining us today. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and thanks for joining. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.